the British media will try and draw a contrast between what has happened over Peter Mandelson's Epstein links and what has happened over Donald Trump.
Let's welcome to the programme, as promised earlier, Lord Darroch. He's a former British ambassador to the United States. Hello to you, Lord Darroch.
Good evening.
Good to have you there. Really grateful for your time. You've been listening to the conversation. You've been having something very like this conversation, I'm guessing, through the day. I mean, has it come down to this at this point, as they prepare to assemble for dinner ahead of tomorrow's more political events, that nothing very much new is going to happen, nothing surprising is going to happen? Lots of talk beforehand. Would Donald Trump shift position on Ukraine? Would he say something on the Middle East that makes our ears prick up? And the expectations of that, in as far as there were expectations, Kim, have disappeared, or were they never really there?
Yeah, it's a fair question, John. And I mean, we will see a lot better when we get to the press conference tomorrow. But let's make 2 points here. One, what happens in America, what America's policies are, is hugely important to us. I mean, it's our biggest bilateral market. Something like 20% of our exports go to America. And if, for example, we had been landed with 25% tariffs on British exports, rather than the 10% we've got, that might have destroyed the British car industry. So there's tens and thousands of jobs tied up with this. Our security is very closely aligned with America. America is the leading country in NATO. Trump is no fan of NATO. But we got to just about an equilibrium, I hope, at the NATO summit recently, because we're all promising rightly to spend more on defence. So for the moment, that's relatively calm. Doesn't mean it won't blow up later. But there's lots of other stuff we need to talk to him about. We need to talk to him about Ukraine and try and make sure that he doesn't either try and impose a bad deal on Zelensky or just walk away from the whole thing and stop supplying weapons to Ukraine. And then America has 10 times as much influence over Israel as us, or should. But I think the Prime Minister needs to say to him, are you really not able to persuade Netanyahu to stop this carnage in Gaza? Just what is the objective here? It all looks like it's going nowhere.
Yeah.
And I think this very quickly, this tech deal, this frontier technology deal, is potentially very good for us, with two American giants, Microsoft and NVIDIA, investing a lot of money in this country. And we'll have another go on issues like trade sanctions, which are absolutely unjustifiable since America runs a trade surplus with us.
Yes.
But you need to keep chipping away at it.
Yeah, well, I mean, we may argue that it's unjustifiable. Donald Trump sees it anything but that way, and he's the guy who counts when it comes to imposing these tariffs.
That's right, but he originally presented his tariffs as about correcting giant trade imbalances, such as America has with China, with Japan, with Korea, and with Germany. Well, if they have a surplus with us, then that argument kind of falls away. So then it becomes just about raising money.
Yeah, exactly. Well, not just raising money, but twisting arms, using tariffs as a coercive instrument. I mean, just ask Denmark. You could ask other South American, and look at Brazil, where tariffs are threatened because Donald Trump insists that Jair Bolsonaro, who tried to stage a murderous coup after losing the election, he says, "Look, let him go, or I'm going to hit you with tariffs." That is not economic. That's barely political. It is coercion.
Right. I think we can all agree, John, that this is not a president, and this is not a president from the post-war American presidential mold.
No, we can agree with that. I want to bring in Mikey and Sam, but Kim, if you were a serving diplomat, you would duck this question. But now you are now a former diplomat. You can answer this with startling frankness. I mean, do you think the king is actually more useful in this relationship in many ways than is the Prime Minister?
I think Keir Starmer's done much better than many of us expected in terms of his private, personal diplomacy with Trump. He's done some quite clever things like ringing up Trump after the assassination attempt, like that visit to Trump Tower in Manhattan before the election. So he's actually, I mean, my expectation was that it might be quite a tricky relationship. Actually, he's done extremely well. And I think the evidence is there in terms of this trade deal, bad though that still is. But there is something different about the king and Trump. Trump revered the late Queen, and he seems to have struck up a very good relationship with King Charles, despite the fact that they disagree profoundly on issues like environment and biodiversity and climate change and this kind of thing. But I think what this tells you if you had any doubts, is what an accomplished diplomat King Charles is,
Yeah.
how experienced he is at dealing with all sorts of foreign leaders, how he can turn on the charm, and the ways he knows of getting his points across. I mean, with Canada, for example, when he wanted to express support for Canada after all this 51st state stuff, all he had to do was visit there. The photograph told the story.
Yes.
So he's quite smart at this kind of thing.
Yes, I mean, I'm with Ukraine. Donald Trump very chuffed at getting an invitation to meet the king. Almost immediately afterwards, Zelensky is meeting the king. And here with me on Pino and Friends, Mikey Smith from the Mirror, Sam Lister from the Express, and our guest, Lord Darroch. Kim Darroch, the former British ambassador to the United States. And Kim, Mikey and Sam, very keen to plumb your brain and get some more out of your experience. Sam.
Hi, Lord Darroch. Yeah, I wondered if you might be able to
Hi.
lift the curtain a little bit, because obviously you've been involved in these types of events in your previous role. Can you just give us a bit of an insight? Because I think tomorrow is going to be the key day when there's the press conference with Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, and that's the moment where this could all, blow up spectacularly. What kind of preparations will they have been making to make sure that this show stays on the road? And did you ever have any particularly tricky experiences yourself that you'd like to share?
Yeah. Yes, of course. I mean, first of all, there's a huge amount of preparation that goes into planning every single minute of the visit, and there will be exchanges of agendas and subjects they want to talk about between the Prime Minister and Trump tomorrow. So all of it will be planned minutely, with just one problem, which is Donald Trump doesn't really stick to agendas, and he doesn't stick to any of this stuff. And I don't think he has ever uttered a line written by a spin doctor in his life. He says what he thinks, which means you're absolutely right. The thing everyone will be kept awake at night on the UK side, and maybe a few on the American side, is what's he going to say at the press conference, especially with the expectation that the British media will try and draw a contrast between what has happened over Peter Mandelson's Epstein links and what has happened over Donald Trump. So you can imagine a flood of Epstein questions coming, actually probably from both American and British journalists. So that will be a compulsory watch. There may turn out to be very boring. Now, in terms of how things go wrong in the past, I'll give you a little story. The first visit, which was a sort of dry run for the 2019 state visit, we took the president to Blenheim Palace in 2018. He's a big fan of Churchill, and this was a semi-state dinner, and there were speeches, and it all was going swimmingly until we all noticed on our mobile phones this urgent message coming through, which was that the Sun had released the text of an interview that the president had given with their political editor of the time, Tom Newton-Dunn, in which Trump had been very critical of the then Prime Minister Theresa May's handling of Brexit and bigged up Boris Johnson as a future leader, which was about as inflammatory as you can imagine. And so we're all listening to these speeches and looking at this and thinking, oh my God, how is this going to play? And of course it did. There was a certain amount of wash up over it afterwards, and thinking, well, what can we do to stop this kind of thing in the future? And there isn't anything, because if you choose to do an interview with a British newspaper in advance, and he's what he thinks, and he hasn't done it this time, I notice. So there you are.
He's doing one with Fox News, I think, which is which may be dropping any time, but I think it's going to be broadcast at 8 o'clock unless that plan's changed. And my colleague behind the glass.
Well, maybe I'm wrong. John. Maybe we're going to have another one of those things. But you're all experienced journalists. I presume you were around to see the Trump comments on British politics in 2018. But it was quite a moment.
Yeah. Mikey Smith.
Hi, I was at Blenheim Palace, and I remember reading it on my phone on the way home because I obviously didn't get into the state dinner. I was going to ask. This time last week, we were sort of chewing over Keir Starmer's options with regard to Peter Mandelson, and whether it was too much of a risk to lose him this close to a state visit. What kind of a risk do you think that was? And do you sense any awkwardness to come over that?
Yeah, Mikey, it was always a risk to appoint Peter Mandelson. You know about his career. He is a brilliant political strategist. As a minister, most civil servants really admired him because he could combine strategic oversight with a forensic eye for the forensic detail. But he's a bit accident prone. So, what's happened has happened, and a lot of you will say, "Oh well, it was always bound to happen. We told you so." Yeah. Look, I think it's kind of out of the way before the visit, just about long enough for the story mostly to have died down and to have moved on. So I think it's all right. I think if I had been advising the Prime Minister, I would have said, appoint the successor before the visit to create a new storyline around this, and so the successor can come to the bank, maybe come to the meeting with Trump tomorrow, and get that story out about who you've chosen, rather than keep the Mandelson story, sort of living on life support. But they won't talk about it in the main meetings at all, I am sure. But you guys will, understandably, have that as your main question for the press conference, and that will make it quite a watch.
I mean, Kim, you say, quite rightly, there were a lot of voices now who say they thought it was a risk not worth taking to appoint Peter Mandelson as our ambassador in Washington. Was that your view?
No, I mean, I'm quite a fan of Peter Mandelson because I saw how good he was at work. And look, when he was first appointed, there was a lot of criticism saying he was a centre-left politician who would never be able to get on with the Trumpies. And if you look at his 8 months in office, we got the best trade deal, basically, of any country. Peter Mandelson seemed to develop strong personal relationships with most of the White House, including the president, with whom he spent an hour about 3 days before the Epstein story came out. And he masterminded this technology agreement, which I think is a very big thing. So that's a pretty good record for 8 months. But with Peter Mandelson, there's some baggage that comes with the brilliance, isn't there?
Yeah, okay. It's been good to get.
And with hindsight, obviously, it looks like the baggage should be given more weight than the brilliance. But, 2 weeks ago, it looked like the brilliance was really delivering.
Kim, it's really good to talk to you, as always. Lord Darroch, there, former British ambassador in DC. Thank you for joining us.